Good morning.
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three Prakim Rambam. We are first going to be learning the final Pedic in Hilchas Geirushin Pedic Yud Gimel, and we're going to begin Hilchos Yibum and Chaliza by learning both Prakim Aleph and Beis. The final chapter, Hilchas Geirushin Pedic Yud Gimel, is speaking about what happens if someone's wife is suspected of not being honest. What's going to happen if the claim of the husband is coming from others? And as we're going to see, there's going to be various scenarios that this claim that the husband died. How do they know that he died? How much of his death must they see? As we're going to have very interesting scenarios where you can witness something. And in the vast majority of the cases, anyone who undergoes that will die. It doesn't necessarily mean that he indeed died. So we're going to put the line in the sand. What is enough and what is still maybe, probably, but not for sure. And therefore she cannot get remarried. Chevra Pedic Yud Gimel has 29 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. First, beginning with a wife that's suspected of not being honest. So here's the case. And as we learned, that when a woman tells her husband in his face, you divorced me, based on the chazaka, that a wife won't have such a chutzpah to say that unless it's true. So we give her an amanas. More than that, she says in front of whom? So, okay, we give her an amanas, but now what were to happen? Those witnesses come and they tell the Beis Din, the husband never gave her a get in front of us. In other words, not only is she not divorced, but now we know that she's not honest concerning this topic. Now, and as we learned yesterday, when she comes back alone, and she says, Meis Bailey, and normally we give Ne'emanus to such a statement, like we mentioned yesterday, because everyone knows that if they're testifying regarding something that could be revealed, if they're saying not emes, they'll say the emes. But here we already saw that she lied before. So therefore, Einon Emenes, because Shazu was the Kashakranis, and we see that Nebuch is trying to get out of her husband. How? If one witness comes and testifies that her husband died, here again, normally we believe one aid, not in our case. Wow, because Shema, he Sachra Oisoi. She might have paid him off to do so. See, when it comes to two aid, then we have no such suspicion, even though anything is possible. But since here she has proven herself to be a dishonest woman regarding this topic, so therefore not only does she lose the manus, but even an aid echad, right? However, in the latter case where she has an aid, in this case, say because she has an aid. Okay. Halacha bits. Now we're not speaking about a woman that's huchsaka as a shakranis, but like we mentioned in the intro, what exactly did she see? And there are times that people exaggerate. We're not going to use the word that they're lying, but they exaggerate. She comes and she says, my husband died in the war. And therefore there's more reason to believe her, because listen, if they leave and they're fighting, so people know that they don't want to be married. Here we have no such prior knowledge. Nevertheless, she saw something that most people who undergo that will die. And she told herself that he died. For example, there was a group of people, right? The first column, the attack column, the middle column, and the bottom column. Both the front and the back all died. So when you look at that, you come to the conclusion everyone in the middle also died. And the husband was be'emtza'an. Guys, I know that by here it says shahoya be'emtza'an. Some of the word is baila. I don't know if you have another Rambam. I think there's missing a word over here. Sharehi oimeres. Not that she's lying, but we think we have to worry that she's telling herself, and she thinks that therefore nereg bechlala, and that's why she's not believed. Now the Rambam takes it to another notch. Even if she says regarding such meis b'milchama, and I buried him. Wow, guys, when a person claims that they buried any other in a battlefield, we already have a suspicion to do that. People are going to be afraid to tarry on a battlefield to bury them. And again, we don't use the word that she's a shakranis. If anyone saw a war, they witnessed a war, a trauma, they're megazim, they exaggerate. That's what we're going to say, maybe. So we don't believe her. However, that's only because she said he died during the war. So such a setting is possible that she saw something and she stretched it into her imagination. But if she comes back and she says, Meisal mitasai, as we learned yesterday, Nemenes, because she, a normal person will be won't lie regarding these matters because she herself will be afraid he'll come back, and she'll be asura lezeh ulezeh. She'll lose her ksuba from this and from that, etc. We don't have independent knowledge that there is a war, and she is the one that lets us know. And here it's a little bit more credibility. Like we learned, we are afraid that whatever she saw is not halachic knowledge of death. However, if she did get married, let's say, let's use the words migu. She didn't have to say that there was a war, right? She could have said, my husband died. God forbid, there was a landslide, a building collapse, surfside. And she says, I know my husband died. Same concept, eina ne'emenes. In other words, there's a concept, not shakranis, but a dimyonis. She fantasized. You see a trauma, people died, your husband was there, you almost see it. A whole pack of snakes or scorpions invaded the house or a neighborhood. And also, eina ne'emenes, Shema tismach dat al reish anashim, that they'll die with such a biting, but that's not enough knowledge of that. Halacha 5. Amra ishnu aleinu bayis, the house filled with smoke, or our enemies filled it with smoke, or the cave, and he died, and I was the one that saved. Eina nemenes, because the very fact that she said that she survived, even if you need a miracle to survive, well, she's a miracle. So maybe just like she had a miracle, he also had a miracle. During a famine, she says, Meis Bailey, Eina nemenes. Here, if she adds, and I buried him, nemenes. So like we mentioned, if she said, I buried him in a battlefield, it's not only that she's exaggerating, but we said that there's Bachlala Chazaka, people don't bury others in a battlefield. During a war, you want to get off the battlefield. That, together with the fact that she might be exaggerating, we put it all together and she loses her nemanos. Here, there's no battlefield. It's a hunger. So Taka, by the laws of nature, he should have died. Many other people died. Could be she's a Dinian that he died. But if she says, I buried him, here we already believe her. Okay, halacha 6. Amra, we were attacked by goyim, or we were attacked by bandits. Here she's nemenes. It's not a ness that she survived. Because here we say, she'ein darkam laharik hanashim. Kedei shenoimar kishem shnetzoi legam hi kach nesoihu. Halacha 7. If there was an epidemic, here we do believe her. Here again, we don't say that it's a miracle that you survived, because that's the nature of a epidemic, or of today of a pandemic. The nature is, we don't understand why. Some people die, some people don't. And there's no rhyme and reason based on our understanding. As we see, older people can die, younger people can live, younger people can die. Whenever there's these outbreaks of epidemics, and the young, strong people died, and the Alta mention survived, and therefore we do give her the normal credibility, and she's not menace. Right? This is referring to Pedicute base, halacha tezvav, that she'eid mipi eid kasher le'edos isha. That was the big chiddush we learned yesterday. Not eid mipi eid. And we said, Eved is saying in the name of an isha, even if these eidim in other areas are b'chlal not them. Here we go. Let's add some spices to that. Like even from an Eved, you heard it from an Eved, you heard it from a Shifcha. But if someone is saying, I heard it from a shaita or a katan, a namayid, they in some canal divrayim. Halacha tes, shoma min hati noikois. If a person heard a group of children that are saying, Achshav banu, we just came, they has to claim from so-and-so's eulogy, and they give details. They're not testifying. This is called Masiach Lefi Tumam. The kach v'kach savdanam hoyasham. Upleni achacham. Upleni Allah achar mitasi. Kach v'kach also b'mitasi. All of that, even though they are minors, right? That's not called Eidos. That's called Sipur Devarim or Masiach Lefi Tumam. There's a big difference when someone is coming to testify, knowing that he is the testimony, ich bin the aid, or I'm ich zog meises. And here there's a group of people, and therefore, this woman now can get remarried. Further, Yisrael she'amar horakti ploini. I killed so-and-so's wife. Harezu tinasei al piv. She'ein adam meisim atzmei rasha. And therefore, he testified that that person died. Now here, you have to understand that we will not punish him. So this is a classic Palgin and Dibura. He's not Neman for him to go to trial, but he's Neman. He's saying that he killed so-and-so, so we can presume that that so-and-so is indeed not amongst the living. Halacha Yud Aleph, Peirit Yud Gimel, Halacha Yud Aleph, Kfar Omarnu, that even a goy, that's Masiach Lefi Tumai, that, by the course of his conversation, he's relating information, even though he doesn't have a din of a witness, we believe that which he was relating. Masiyan al-Piv. Ketzad, for example, wow, never, that person died. He was such a nice person. How much good he did to me. When I was walking on this trip, that guy, and he mentions a Yid's name, was with us, and they fell and he died. And Kate said, we were all in shock. How can such a thing happen? In other words, that's called Masiach Lefi Tumai. It doesn't appear that he's coming to testify. He's coming to relate a story. It appears that his intention was not to give testimony. Then we believe even a goy, even for something so serious that she, who was known to be a married woman, is now presumed to be a widow, and therefore she's allowed to marry a person of her choice. Halacha Yud Beis. Yisrael sheshama migoy hamasiach lefi tumay. A Yid heard a goy being masiach lefi tumay. Now, like we said, again, the Rambam began again today in Halacha 8, that aid mipi aid. So it can be a Yid in the name of the goy. Meyet sheshama mimeno. He's just relating to the base than what he heard, the masiach lefi tumay from the goy, and the tinasi al piv, and she may get remarried. If we are worried, maybe he had some other intent in mind. So we have to dig into that. You need a good psychologist there. You do for me this and that, so I should not kill you the way I killed, and he mentions that Jew. Here we say he's not Masiach Lefi Tumai. Maybe he's lying. All he wants is to cast fear, right, on the person whom he's talking to. Maybe is only lahatal ema al zeh. Similarly, if you heard from a Goyish court that they are saying that we killed so-and-so, you don't believe them. Because non-Jewish courts like to boast that they killed people in order for people to fear them. Right, the government is saying what we did. They don't trust them. If he opened up the topic, like we mentioned in Halacha Yudalef, he came, he says, wow, we were on a trip and that happened. So he was just making a conversation. And then people began to make an inquiry. You began to do bedikas and chakiras. And you made a bedika. And you went, did he do this? Did that happen? And once you come to the questions, he understands that he's being interrogated. And he further expounded that which happened. That's fine. We believe him. Umasiyan al piv, since it began as a Masiach Lefi Tumai. Halacha 6:15. Kfaroi dainu. We already learned that Rambam says again yesterday that I heard that so-and-so died, even if he heard it from a woman who's in other areas not a halachically accepted witness, or if he heard it from an evet. And therefore she may get remarried based on that testimony. Va'ani re'isiv shemeis. And then you begin to interrogate them. Heich re'isa. Ubamei yodato shemeis. In other words, you don't have to start poking, but if you begin poking questions, then their answers has to be absolute answers. So if they answer, they gave precise answers to the questions, then like we began today's chapter, she says, or he says, yeah, I saw the battle and I saw the soldiers getting killed. Did you see this guy's husband, her husband dead? No, but I saw the guy on his right side dead, on the left side dead. Okay, so then you don't believe anymore. That has to be a testimony of certainty and not a presumption, which is not enough to be matir and eshes ish. Halacha Tazayin, for example, someone says, I saw so and so fall into the sea. These tragedies happen every now and then, right? And B'chlal, we differentiate between what halacha calls, but Rambam doesn't use these words now, mayim she'ein lehem soif versus mayim she'yesh lehem soif, which means if you are in a body of water and you, the witness, can see all of the periphery, you see all of it, you see all of its boundaries. That means if a person would have crawled out, you would have seen it. Your seeing he fell in and he didn't get out is a proof that he drowned, even though you don't find the body yet. But when you see a person falling into the sea, here in the Pacific Ocean or in the Atlantic Ocean or even in a big lake, but if you cannot see all of the edges of the water, even though it's highly likely that he didn't come out, but maybe he walked out. You didn't see it because you couldn't see all of the periphery. A person fell into the sea. That's not enough. And this happens once in a million, but that's enough for the woman Nebuch to be stuck because maybe she's still a married woman. Maybe the husband is alive. Why didn't he show up? Because he has amnesia. You don't know. Oh, but if he falls into gathered water, like into a pit or into a cave, the point is, this is what the Gemara says. She can see all of the periphery, and the witness was there in the amount of time that if someone under the water will die, I don't know what the time is, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever the time. And during that time, no one came out. That's a proper testimony. And she gets remarried. And another example, someone was thrown into the sea or fell into the sea. And a net was thrown in there. And what all the net brought up was a limb. Now that you have to add, it must be a scenario where on that limb you have what we call in halacha siman muvak, a definite siman that limb was from that person. That guy had a mole on his arm, right? They brought up a limb, but what type of limb? A limb that if someone loses that limb, they cannot live. Like I said, an arm, you have those arteries. God forbid, if a person gets the whole thing cut off. Then, even though you didn't see him, you saw the limb. Other examples, a person fell into a layer of lions or leopards. Then, guys, it's interesting. If they're not hungry, and if you don't fall on top of them, they'll let you be until lunchtime. Unlike snakes, remember that in the Gemara? If you fall in a pit of snakes, there's no room for anything. So you fell on the snakes. When you fall on poisonous snakes, your knack on them, it instigates them. And B'chlal snakes, they like biting and killing people, stam. Unlike a lion, he only wants to eat. He has nothing personal. So that's the difference. So if you see a person falling into such a layer of lions, then you can't say that the person died. You can tell based on the guy fell into that in the zoo, but it doesn't mean that he's dead. You have to find a body to determine that. After Shaloi Yechlu, if it's a gathering of snakes or scorpions, or if inside of a fire, or a pot that's filled with wine or with oil, God forbid, or if you saw both the trachea and the esophagus, or the majority of them being cut, even if you saw the guy running away, you can testify that he died because vadai soif alamus. Even if you didn't see the actual death, then if you see a person hanging and you see vultures eating out of the body, you don't know if he died or not. Even if prior to him being hung, raised by the Romans, crucified, he was stabbed, you can't testify that he died. People survived that. But if you see the vulture, the bird, eating out of a part of his body, that when that part is removed, the person will die. The vulture was eating out of his brain. Okay, that's fine. Then he's dead. The heart, the mind, the heart, Ubnei Meyav, Chabad, Chagas, Nehim, how great is that? Now, today we began the chapter when a woman was saying that. Now we're speaking about one person. I saw that person died in a war. I saw him dying under a collapsed home, or I saw him. And let's add, if the witness says, and I buried him, then he's Neman. In other words, unlike the din of a woman saying, that's already different. Here we say that she can have a dimyon. She was so afraid for her husband. Okay, halacha chav. There's more nemanos for the aid than for the person's wife. Halacha 20. If someone tells a woman that that I saw your husband drowning in water, that I couldn't see all of the periphery, but he didn't go up. Let's add, and no one heard about him afterwards. His name was forgotten. She cannot get remarried, as we just said. But here also, if she already got remarried, then these are the tragic cases that every now comes up. You have to know these halachas well, and make one thing is clear: that Dinei Yerusha goes on one track. Dinim of a woman is a whole different track. We don't have to be consistent. Sometimes we can say that the Yarshim are allowed to take the money because what's the worst case scenario? The father comes back, halavai, they'll give the money back. Here, it's undoable if she gets remarried and she has children from another husband. That's a mu'uvis shelo yuchal liskoin. Then he says, even there, if she already got remarried, loy seitze. But if a chacham is going to tell her you can get married, you put that chacham into a nidui. And I'm telling you, there's pressure on the chacham. There's so much pressure on the beis din or on the rabbi in these cases that it's unbelievable. Because there's such a rachmanas on her, mamish trapped, disasters. When do they sit shiva? Also doesn't go together. Sometimes she claims you have to sit shiva, so you sit shiva and you can't get remarried. Yiddish tzadis halacha chafal matzu'u harugay meis. Okay, a body is found, murdered or died. Now you have to recognize the body. That's another whole topic. It's not so simple. Parts of panov kayamim. You need the forehead with the nose and the facial features. If I remember correctly, maybe at least in the Gemara, the facial features includes the cheekbones. In other words, it's that part of the face that is needed to be intact for someone to say, I recognize. Because if that was not intact and you saw the mouth and the chin, even though you know, you don't know. One person can be confused with the other. So in such a case, then but if any one of these three, the forehead, guys, the nose, and the facial features. Again, I think it means the cheekbones. And then, you know the guy's body. You know the guy had a pimple on his arm. Or you know the guy's clothing. And that deceased person was wearing that. Even if it was a shuma. That means it was a birthmark. Maybe someone else had the same birthmark. Shema acharu. Even if the three that we mentioned, the forehead, the nose, and the facial features are intact, you can only testify if you found the person 3 days from death. After that, because unless the body is in water, the parts of panov, the facial features get distorted. Now, halacha chav beis, unlike in water, tava bayam, if the person, God forbid, drowned, and ultimately the body did wash up, now people are coming to identify who's the body. If you can recognize the face, here we're mentioning the nose, made in olive, because they won't change after 3 days. It takes many, many days in the water for the facial features to change. But if after the body was washed up, there was a change, and the Rambam writes only a couple of hours. By the nispach, the corpse becomes bloated, which is what happens. That's already a change. Even Olav, curious to know nowadays about DNA testing, or they go to the dentist, how much of that is going to be accepted. All right, you have a body, and it looks like him, but you're not certain because the nose is missing. I'm curious to know what Allah is. Another thing, that whenever it meets the criterion, it doesn't have to be in sunlight. Even if you're using just a flashlight, that's also enough. Someone is saying about himself, you only see him in the distance, that my name is Pliny ben Pliny, not his name, from that place, and I was just bitten by a snake, and I'm dying. Then when you go and you go see his body, you cannot recognize him anymore. Here, the chiddush is masiin es ishtoi. We don't assume that this guy is lying. Why don't you recognize him? Because the poison changed his features. That when I go to that place, and Mar Lahem, tell them, Shemeis Yitzchak b'mechol. In other words, someone was told in another location, someone came from New York. He comes here to LA and he says, when I was in New York, a Beis Din told me that when I come to LA, I should say that Yitzchak ben Mechol passed away. Now the shliach doesn't know who Yitzchak ben Mechol is. If we know who he is, even though normally the witness has to know, but here we say that an aid mipi aid is okay. That's fine. So he's an aid mipi aid and mipi Beis Din. And what's the chiddush? We don't say that maybe there was another Yitzchak ben Mechol in a case where we are certain. Now, Yotza Yisrael the goy me'imanu l'makam echad. A yid and a goy go on a trip. The guy comes back without a Jew, and he says, "The guy who went with me died." Again, the guy never knew who he was, but we know that there was only two people that traveled together. It's also enough. But here we have to add, he has to say that I buried him. All right. Now, if the guy knew who he is, he doesn't even have to say that. That's the point. Even a guy, we believe him. A group of people were taken and they were all shackled in chains or noisim gemalim, or they were tied by heavy ropes that are normally used to tie up camels. In other words, they were taken as prisoners. And the guy told us, wow, those 10 people that went from here to there, all bound up, right? Or they were forced to carry this and that. All of them died, and I buried them. Here he doesn't even know who they are, but he's giving a simon, and we know, that's them. Halacha 27. Amazing. And the yid that is testifying doesn't know who he is, but he's giving identifying marks, and he's saying, this is what he looked like. That's not enough. See, that's already not enough. He has to know more about it. See, it's very different than you seeing 10 people were tied together in shackles. Okay, then there was no other 10 people that were taken away in shackles. Here he's saying, I saw a guy that died and he was tall and he was this. It could be there was someone else that had more or less the same features. The one guy that left the city, that one guy died. If we discover later that only one person left the city, that's a good siman. It's a chiddush, but it's a good siman, and the wife could get remarried because now halachically we presume her to be a widow. Halacha 28, matzu kasav b'shtar. If you find it written in a document, meis ish pliny ben pliny, or so and so got killed, and you know that it was written by a yid, that's good testimony. Gavaldik. More than that, someone lost the power of speech. And he's coming, and with his motions of his head, he's trying to communicate that so and so died. So you examine him, as we learned above, the way you're a baidik for a get, which means you ask the person 3 questions. Some answer yes, the answer is no, and you see how he shakes his head. So if that which is yes, he shakes yes, that for which is no, he says no. You see that the guy is saying, even though he can't speak. Vinim says that And then he writes, you rely on that and she can get remarried. Also, the normal inquiries that you make of a witness does not need to be done when someone is testifying that someone's husband died. We want to make sure that women are not bound and stuck. And people are going to wonder, that's going to be the final halacha, but still, it's such a serious topic. A married woman who gets remarried to another man while she's still married to the first, mamzedim will be the children. How can we be so lenient? So the Rambam concludes the whole series by saying, that don't wonder, it should not be difficult in your eyes. How could it be? Only by Ya'isha or a Shifcha or Eid Mipi Eid or only Mipi Aksav, and without Risha and Chakira, it's all of the normal rules of how witnesses are to be accepted don't apply here. We are so lenient. How can that be? Says the Rambam, when do we have to be very precautious and have only two and then cross-examine them? Only when they are testifying about something that will not be known. Like if they say Reuven murdered Shimon, Reuven lent the money to Shimon. You're only relying on the two witnesses. You will never know later otherwise. But something that at least could be discovered without you needing any witnesses. Like, for example, if the husband is still alive, he could show up. And even if he doesn't show up, people that saw him will show up. So you're testifying about something that you, the witness, knows. If they're lying, I'm playing with fire. My lie could be uncovered. That in itself is the biggest checks and balances that they will be saying the truth.
More that she's going to do the inspection herself.
Also, both. Again, then he's saying good. And also, that we learned that in the Gemara, that even there are times that even if the witness is accepted in halacha, the woman herself, she doesn't want to be mekalkal herself. So we are relying on that. Like if the guy returns. So therefore, like Pida Torah Olive, we're not that careful. We're not that makbid. It's very distant that this person will give false testimony. And yes, and even people that otherwise are not kosher witnesses, but there is an underlying reason. We're not stam lenient because there is a goal. The goal is for Jewish women not to remain unmarried. And that's really our kind to the Eibishter, that we are married to God. God has to come back. We are in Aguna. And that cannot be. Blessed is the merciful one that helped us conclude the Hilchas Geirushin with the coming of Mashiach. Hilchas Yibum and Chaliza. Wow, so many people just finished learning the Masechtas Yevamis. It's amazing what people really had the Yigia, how quick we're going to go through it as a Chazara in the Rambam, which is Gavaldik. And if you didn't learn...
section was all Yevamis.
I know, but still, and if you didn't learn Masechtas Yevamis, same wow, Ashreinu, that we have a Rambam that came and compiled all of these halachas the way he did it. First, the intro. In these series of Yibum and Chaliza, we're going to have a total of 3 mitzvahs. 2 of them will be positive mitzvahs, and 1 of them will be a negative mitzvah. Number 1, there's a mitzvah to do Yibum, positive. Number 2, to do Chaliza. It's either or, but both of them are positive mitzvahs. And number 3, that that this woman who's a Yavama, as we'll explain in a moment, she's not allowed to marry any other man until that reshus of the Yavam was removed from her. Either it was finalized through Yibum or it was removed through Chalitza. The Ha'isha shehi ru'uya liyibum, a woman who's in this state of waiting either to get Yibum or Chalitza is called Zekuka liyavam. And the Reshus Hayavam Nikreis, the mandate, the obligation on the brother or any of the brothers to finalize that connection is called Zika. Remember the Zika? Now we have COVID. Then we had Zika. It was a couple of years ago. But that's called Zika. Brazil was filled with Zika. So let me just say, Bahar Bekitzer. So here's the story. If a man marries a woman, if this man has a brother or brothers, and if he does not have any children, not with her, he didn't have children prior to marrying her, or even if he had children and they died but prior to their death, they had children. So we can be speaking about an elderly person. Was if a person passes away and he has descendants, none of what we're saying now is applicable. And not only that, generally, a man is prohibited, erva, to marry his brother's wife, even if he divorces her. So there is the highest level of isur for a man to marry Esha Sachiv. However, if the brother passes away without any descendants at all, then the widow is already connected to the brother or to the brothers. That connection is called Zika. And the Torah gives a mitzvah, as we'll see throughout these chapters. The first chapter is going to be the basics of Yibum and Chaliza. Let's begin already with chapter number 2, that ideally the older brother should be the one doing it, but it doesn't have to be the older brother. He should either do Yibum. Yibum means he moves into her as a husband and wife. Midoiraisa, no pre-steps are done. Midrabanan, again, next chapter, the Chachamim says it's not appropriate. Give Kiddushin the way you normally do to a woman who you're going to marry, but Midoiraisa, they're already connected. So either they live together as a husband and wife, or there's a ceremony called Chaliza, and that severs that bond. That's Yibum and Chaliza. Perek Aleph has 23 halachas. We're going to learn all of the basics of Yibum and Chaliza, beginning with halacha Aleph. Mitzvah asay min ha-Torah. There's a positive commandment in the Torah, sheyiyabem adam eishes achiv me'aviv, that your paternal brother, not maternal, paternal brother, you should make Yibum to her, whether your brother who passed away was fully married to her, Nesuyin, even if the original husband, let's go to Reuven, okay, and as the brother Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, even if Reuven only gave a woman Kiddushin, which is something that doesn't happen. Now we do it together, but that's it. If Reuven died, but Reuven has no children, it's not about her, it's about him not having children. Shenemar, and the source is in Parshas Kiseitze, Ubein ein loy, then what's the mitzvah? Yavama Yava Yala. Now we learned, remember, Mishnayis, Machlekes, Rabbanan, and Abba Shol, for those who learned Yavamas now, or for those who have good memories, that what is the ideal? Is the ideal to do Chalitza? Is the ideal to do Yibum? Abba Shol already writes, it's ideal to do Chalitza. The Rambam paskins like the Rabbanan, just to know that ideally you do Yibum. Nowadays, we don't go with the Chacham. Nowadays, the Beis Din will tell the brother, do Chalitza. Okay, but the Rambam doesn't go on that path. The mitzvah ideally is to do Yibum.
Even if we're on opinion, but ideally it's Yibum, just they didn't have pure intention, so therefore they switched.
The question is, what intentions do we have? Very good. In other words, the reason why we do that is because when a person is marrying her only for the mitzvah, then everyone holds to Yibum. Now, there's nothing wrong marrying her because you like her. That's a good thing. But you're not doing it for the mitzvah. So once you're not doing it l'shem mitzvah, then we say better to do chalitz. By Torah law, the way you finalize that union is not by doing the step of Kiddushin, even though the Rambam began Hilchos issues by saying that the whole Chiddush of Matan Torah is that God added the step of Kiddushin for Jews prior to marriage, prepare for marriage by the act of Kiddushin. Not over here, because Shezoi Ishtoihi, it's as if God is making the Shidduch. That's the way we view it. Ella, how do you marry her? Have a relation with her. L'shem marriage. And another detail, marriage demands a ksuba. And the Rambam doesn't say it over here, but we already spoke it out in the previous series. Even though the brother has heirs, he has no children. I know that. But we're going to learn in the laws of inheritance, if someone has no descendants down, it goes up. So either his father or if his father is no longer living, then it's going to go to the father's heirs. In our case, the brother who will do Yibum with that woman will inherit all of his property. But let's add a detail. Since the brother is Chayv Ksuba, all of the Chiyuvim of the Ksuba, all of them are linked to the property. So she enters the marriage already with the Ksuba. Now we're going to learn details, I think today in the second chapter, what happens if she was Moichel the Ksuba to the first brother. So he shouldn't have been with her, but he was with her. He's going to have to write another Ksuba. It has to be a Ksuba, but normally the Ksuba gets passed over. Halacha 2. If Yibum, no, that's mamish the das of the Chachamim. Do Yibum. If Yibum is not going to happen, either he doesn't want or she doesn't want, again, more details about that in the next chapter that we'll learn today, God willing, then the other step is to then do Chalitza. The word Chalitza means the removal. There's a very interesting ceremony. I think you can find it today online. You have to, I hope, and I think that everyone gave consent. It's a private event, but it's very interesting to witness how she removes a shoe off his foot. It's a very halachic type of shoe. It's not mamish the way you think she removes it, but there's some removal that she does. There's many words that she tells him. She spits on the ground in front of him, not on him. And she tells him, this is what you do to a man who doesn't want to build up his brother's household. And if they do get Yibum and they have a child, then we're going to learn that you name the child on the name of the brother that passed away. It says in Zajac that when she spits on the ground, if you were to look in the spittle, you won't see the reflection of your face. You're going to see the face of the person who passed away, but don't do that. I love when he says that. So there's a lot by Chaliza. And after Chaliza, then she can get remarried. Now, u'mitzvas asay min ha'Torah, to do Chaliza if they don't want to do Yibum, shenemar b'chol tzanal le'vigoyim. Says the Rambam, mamish, this is the words of the Rabbanan, not Abashol. U'mitzvas Yibum koydem es le'mitzvas Chalitza. Halacha number 3. Says shenemar b'Torah u'bein ein loy, that the husband who passed away has no child. It doesn't mean he didn't have a child with her. Another thing, bein, if you want to interpret it narrowly, it means male gender, not over here. It doesn't mean that if he had a daughter, you have to do Yibum. It means bein alay means no kids. That he didn't have a son. He doesn't have a daughter. Or maybe he had a son and his son already got married and the son has descendants. And then Nebuch, the son, passed away, B'chayav, the father. That's also called he has a son. He has Zera. He has descendants. Oy Zera habein, oy Zera habas. If there's any descendants of the man who passed away, but we're going to speak about Reuven, then no Yibum, no Chalitza. And whether maybe he had children from another wife, okay. We're going to learn later, even if he has a child, a mamzer, God forbid. He has a child. Appointed a system in a Chalitza in a Yibum. I feel is that a mamzer, God forbid. That means he had a relation with a married woman. Chutzvah. But he has a child, he has a descendant. Or what happens if his child is serving idols? It doesn't mean that he had a relation with a non-Jewish woman, because there, if a Yid has a relation with a non-Jewish woman and has a child, it's not his child, it's the mother's child. Here it means that even if someone's child is Pashat Oiven Avodah Zarah, the worst of the worst, but he has a descendant, and don't forget, if it's Pleited Asishtoi, then a brother is not allowed to marry her. Erva, Eishes, Halacha 4. But if he had a child, but he had it with a slave woman, or if he had it from a non-Jewish woman, ain't appointed a sishtoi, because shezera habo min hashivcha are avodim, and a child that comes if he had a relation with a non-Jewish woman are a complete goyim, and it's as if they're not yours. You have no children. The proof is from scripture. Now, Parshas Mishpatim. The Lamed Shavuot is like the mother, like the father. There's no yichus by Avodim at all. And by the Goya, that's the pasuk you have also from Chitas. Maybe it's a little bit different, but the Rashi quotes the same source. Rambam quotes the source, which is in Bas Chana. When the Torah says the Isur of intermarriage, even though the Torah is explicitly only speaking about the 7 nations. Doesn't only mean the 7 nations. That's a pasuk, not to marry out. So, and if you'll marry out, ki yasid as bin chama acharai. That means if your son will marry a non-Jewish woman, that ki yasid as bin chama acharai, meisir oisem elachashav bakol. Rashi teaches this pasuk here. The pasuk is literally actually speaking about that your daughter is Jewish. She marries a non-Jew. Why don't you allow that? The pasuk says because the father who's not Jewish, won't educate the child to be a Jew. Rashi says it's there. Rashi says, the problem is that they won't be educated to be a Jew, but he is a Jew because the mother is Jewish. In the other direction, the Rashi says, from the Gemara, that the Torah doesn't have to say anything because it's v'chol not Jewish. Rambam is using this pasuk to say, ki yasir es bin chama achrei, meaning that if the mother is not Jewish, not the way Rashi learns, then meisir oisam elachashav v'kol. Since the mother is not Jewish, she's not part of the Jewish community. And furthermore, even if after the fact you emancipated that child, or that son that a person had, God forbid, with a non-Jewish woman, got converted. Now he's a Yid. Doesn't matter. He's not connected to you halachically. It's good for your tshuva, but it doesn't help for this. Furthermore, even and not only that, but after he emancipated the shivcha, he married her. So he's married. She falls to Yibum because she got converted. That's what emancipation does. And they have a child together, a biological child. she falls to Yibum. Even though she has a child with him, Gavaldik, because that child is a convert. A convert is like halachically a newly born person. So this person halachically died without children. Halacha 5. Oh, now it gets fun. Not fun, God forbid. A man passes away, but in this case, the case has become a bit fun. And his wife is pregnant. So if you now what? So if she has a miscarriage, God forbid, after he passes away, so what does that mean? That means that he passed away without any children. Miscarriage means that the baby never came into the world alive. But if Yolda, the Yolda means that the child took a breath. Now it gets a bit complicated. So I guess, theoretically, if we know that this child was a fully developed child, which we know nowadays, then we say, even if the child, God forbid, passed away right after birth, that means he passed away with the child. Afterwards, the child died, no more Yibum and Chalitza. Nevertheless, we're not done. And people are thinking from the Gemara, you'll see in a moment. When we don't pass in this way for practical reasons, because we don't know whether the child was gestated for 9 months. 1 second. Was if the child was a full-term baby and the child took a breath, then there's no Yibum Chalitza minatoida. And still, guys, remember halacha hey. We're going to need this for later. But avol medivrei soifrim you have to be certain that the child was a viable child halachically. However, guys, everything we're saying now is midrabanan because midoiraisa, you presume it was a fully developed child. But if halachically you don't have that certainty, you have to know how to rule that. So then you need another detail. The child must live for 30 days. And then you say, even though the child passed away, it was a full-term baby. And therefore, there's no Yibum and Chalitza. And therefore, I don't know why the Rambam sometimes changes Yibum and Chalitza, and sometimes Chalitza and Yibum. Even if the child, God forbid, dies on the 30th day of birth, whether the child passed away because it was born ill, or whether the child passed away from a side thing, like God forbid he fell from the roof or he was eaten by a lion. Still, midrabanan harei safek nefel, safek ben kayama, and therefore lefikach. What do you do when you have a doubt? Don't forget, guys. If a woman is exempt from Yibum Chalitza, a brother marrying her is an erva. So whenever there's a doubt, the option is do Chalitza to cover that option. Then only Chalitza. Whenever there is no obligation for Yibum midoiraisa, there's never going to be Chalitza. Here, there's a suffix. That's why you have to do Chalitza. Halacha 6. Now let's speak about a brother. We said it has to be paternal. Okay, what happens if a person has a paternal brother that's a mamzer? God forbid. That means a person discovers that his father had a relation with a married woman. And she gave birth to a brother. That's also called a brother. Afilo mamzer. Or even if the brother, God forbid, is an idol worshiper. Furthermore, even if the brother that's now alive is a minor, and that's very difficult for the woman because a minor, we'll see soon, certain things cannot be done by the cotton. Yibum is easier, not ideal. Chalitza, for sure, him and her have to be adults, right? Ben cotton, ben gadol. So the rule is that it depends, was the brother alive when Reuven passed away? As long as the brother, from the legitimate marriage, from another wife, God forbid, act of infidelity. If that brother came into the world, was born, halachically born means that the head and the majority came into the world. All right, sometimes we have other terms about the forehead, but however you determine birth, if that happened for a second prior to Reuven's death, means when Reuven died, he had a brother. Then Hareza Zoykek es Ishtay Yibum, even though if this guy is a mamzer, she won't be allowed to marry him. Right? So she's going to have chalitza because there is a zika. Or if the guy is an oived avodah zarah, I'm saying you're not going to tell her to marry her. Point is that's called a brother. We're going to unpackage more detail soon. Halacha, middle of the 6. You're looking at me, Danny. Yeah, good. But the same thing, if this Reuven has a brother paternally, because his father, God forbid, had a relation with a non-Jewish woman, that's not called a brother again. Or if he had a relation with a shivcha, And therefore, that means that when he died, he then had no brother, is nish. Even in the case that we mentioned, that Reuven's father had a relation with a goy, and she converted. She converted prior to giving birth, which means, like we just mentioned this yesterday, the baby won't have to go to the mikveh. But you should know that if the conception was not when she was already after her conversion, we viewed the child as a convert. And the child doesn't have to go to the mikveh because the child already went to the mikveh. How did the child go to the mikveh? The mother went to the mikveh. And the mother's body is not creating a chatzitza, because since they both have to go to the mikveh, min b'minoi ein a chaitzitz. Oh, so the moment we view the brother as a convert, they're not halachically related. Halacha 7, another thing, brothers that are only maternal brothers, they're not considered brothers, only for the loss of Avelus. You have to mourn for them, or you are not a valid witness because you are Rishon B'Rishon, right, or Sheni B'Sheni, fine. Yerusha, which is not our topic, but for our topic, Yibum and Chaliza, we don't take into account maternal brothers. Halachically for these topics. Halacha number 8. So as we just mentioned, they themselves, two brothers converted, right? A whole family converts, happens. So they converted when they had 5 kids. They're not halachically brothers. Halachically. And vafilu echad mehem oirasa shle b'kedusha, v'lidasa b'kedusha, v'asheni irasa v'lis b'kedusha. Even here, hayim kizarim, like we mentioned, even twins, and they were conceived, and while the mother was carrying the twin, she went to the mikvah. So they were born with kedusha, and they're twins. Ein b'neim achva. Acheti oirasa v'lis b'kedusha. Halacha number 9. Oilei nashim rabbis from Meis. Now, before Chedim the Rabbeinu Geirushin, a man was allowed, as we learned, to marry 2 wives at the same time. So let's speak about a man who had many wives, and then this man passed away without children. So we don't say that the mitzvah, the zikah, right, is to all of the wives. We're going to learn soon about many brothers. Let's begin with a lot of wives. So the din is, Yibum and Chaliza has to be done only with one. It may not be done with more than one. Biyasa, which is Yibum, or Chaliza, Shal achas mehen poiteres asashad. We're learning the foundational rules. And ve'eno meyabam, you may not do yibum to 2, as the Torah says in Kisei. Say ashelo yibna, like she tells him if she does chalitza, she gives him as a good musar speech. This is what we do to a man that doesn't build his brother's home. A home is in reference to the wife, and it's in the singular dafka. Now let's go not to a man, Reuven, who had many wives, but let's go to Reuven who had 1 wife, but Reuven has another 11 brothers. Only 1 brother does chalitza, or only 1 brother is meyabim to 1 of the wives, and then v'yutru she'ara tzarais, all the other co-wives that are called tzarais become permissible. Halacha yudchoi v'yivamas elu kisheres lekahona psulais. Now, guys, like this: if a man does chalitza midrabanan, that woman cannot marry a kohen. Midoiraisa, a kohen cannot marry a divorcee. A kohen could marry a widow, right? When Reuven died, she became a widow. If chalitza will be done to her, then midrabanan, a kohen cannot marry her. If the brother is going to do chalitza, so if there are a few wives, one of them anyways cannot marry a kohen, or a kohen, because she prior to this marriage was already divorced from another man. Do chalitza with that woman. Be a mensch. Do an act that won't add new restrictions. So there was a woman that's kosher, but there was already, again, one of Reuven's wives prior to his marriage was married to another man, and she got divorced from him. So Yibum doesn't make a difference. Make Yibum with however it works. We're going to have a lot more details about that, but do Yibum. But then be a mensch. Yachaloitz lapsula. Kadei shelo yifsel asak shelo lekona b'chalitza. Halacha yudal. Meisuloi achem rabim. Meisuloi achem rabim. A man. Here we go. Another scenario. So we have. Let's go to my Reuven case. Reuven is married. Shimon is married. Both Reuven and Shimon pass away. And now you have Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun. Here, each husband's wife needs either Yibum or Chalitza. So it's only one is that one guy had many wives. even though he has many brothers. One brother does either Yibum or Chalitza with one of the wives. But if someone has brothers who passed away, and both of their wives, or all of their wives, 3 brothers, God forbid, who passed away. So you have 3 wives that fall to Yibum. So now you got to do to each one. And the Rambam's passing like the Chachamim is such. We learned this in the beginning of the issues that during that time, the Rambam says a man should not marry more than 4 wives. Try. Good luck to you. Try that. But so if you could, you have to it's the mitzvah b'yibum before chalitza still stands, and if not, any way you want, you can do chalitza to all of them. You can do chalitza to some of them and be miyam in some of them, because achas mikol bayis ubayis. So it's only one. Not in our case. Halacha Yud Aleph. Every husband's wife has her own din of she's a zekuka liyibum, and you have a zika to her. Halacha 12. The moment you marry your vama, nesru tzaraseha olav. All her co-wives now are prohibited. Now, guys, I want to say the following: Reuven is married to many wives. All of the brothers may not marry them because of an erva. When Reuven passes away without children, that death removes the isur erva. There's another isur that comes about. The other isur would be is that after you did the yibum, right, to one of them, the other co-wife you may not marry, but it's not on the same level of achiv, because there was a moment that you had a heter to marry her if you would have chosen her. So the Rambam says, and not only is that the other co-wives prohibited, we'll see, not on the level of Erva, but also on all the other brothers. If they have a relation, so normally the din will be, erba, mamzer, not anymore. It's taka aser, but here you're violating an asay. As what's the positive commandment? It says yavama yava yaleo. From there, Chazal learned aleo means on her and not on any other of the co-wives. And the lava Malchal say is asur, but only I'm saying only relative to an erba, to a kares asay, and that's not only by yibum. So not only is that woman with whom you did chalitza no longer allowed for marriage, not allowed, not her, not any of the co-wives, if there were co-wives, but not an erva anymore. This is the asay. Nesra chalutza he v'chol. And not only on the one who performed chalitza, but on any other of the brothers. Shimon did chalitza, but now Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar may no longer marry any of Reuven's co-wives. Now, 1 second. Before we spoke about an asay on her. Now we're speaking about that the chalutza is asur, right? V'chol tzaraseh on the other brothers. They are asur medivrei soif from kashniyos. Because shema'achar shemeis achiv b'loy vlad. Since there was a moment where there was yibum and chalitza, that's the key. Nestalek isur erba ma'al kol nashav. The isur of eshes achiv is completely removed. Even though now you did yibum or chalitza, so now there's another isur, but not the level of erba. Halacha, and therefore, Geirushin kashniyos. If you were to marry them, halacha yud gimel hachoyletz liyavimtoi. A man does chalitza. Shem sheyasura olav. Just like we just mentioned, he may not marry her from now going forward. Her relatives are also asur on him, like her mother, like her daughter. And she, again, since there was a zika, even though they did chalitza, doesn't retroactively do anything. You understand? Going bas bita. She is viewed like a wife whom you divorced. And all of the prohibitions, biblical, rabbinical, that you have with her family members, continue in our case. Still, asur b'kroi boiseha. Ke'ilu hoise ishtov amesa tachtov. In other words, what makes it is not the fact you gave her chalitza. The fact is that you were bound to her. Another din says that I'm a mamuter la'adam. Now listen to where we put the line. A person is allowed to marry. Achois saras chalutzase. Oh, it's a person did chalitza. So we said that this man now cannot marry the co-wife. That's called the shniya. But if the co-wife has a sister, that's already permitted. or other relatives of the co-wife of the woman with whom you did chalitza. Halacha Yudalat. Asur liyavam lisa kreva zukokasi. A yavam may not marry the relative of this woman with whom he has a zika, like the mother, like the daughter. Ad sheyiyabim echad mi echav lav. Now here's gavaldik chiddush. So guys, let's go like this. Reuven married a woman. Reuven passes away. Shimon goes ahead and does Yibum with her. Levi can marry her mother. Oi, Yachaloitz, or if the brother did Chaliza with her, and therefore v'tosas ikasam olel. So this person we just mentioned, midrabanan as a shniya, right? Shimon, who did Chalitza with the widow, cannot marry the widow's mother, but another brother could. The Yisa imoy bita shar kodevisa, the other brothers. Afal pishem kulam asuros al echav shechalotza yibum kamay shabiyan. Halachat as well. A person does Yibum, and he consummates the marriage with the widow, and then he divorces her. So if he wants to remarry her, we learned this, I think it was yesterday or over Shabbos, right? The whole sugya of machzer gerushasai, then yachzer, because she's like any other wife. Right? We don't say that since you divorced her, the isur of your brother's wife goes back, never comes back. Not midivrei Torah, nor midivrei Seifrim. Halacha Tazayim for Biyarnu Bilchas issues. Now we're going to go into Yibum. Now, of course, we're not advocating any of what we're saying now. We want to know halachically whether it's valid. Yibum halachically means that any of the brothers will have an act of cohabitation with this widow. When is that act considered an act? He has to be 9 years old. For Biyarnu Bilchas issues. Not that this should be done, but if he was under 9 years old and he did the physical act, it's not considered an act of bia. If he's 9 years old and one day, which means we call him in English 9 years old, then bia say bia. We have this oral tradition. And therefore, if a Yibum katan had a relation with his Yivimtai, if he was 9 years old in one day, well, that consummated the marriage. Now, that's if they are consummating the marriage. What happens if the option is chalitza? Today we advocate chalitza. A minor cannot perform chalitza. It has no significance. And not only yagdil, not only 13, but you actually have to physically examine him to see whether his body is maturing. The yibadek sharei ish kasav b'parshli in chalitza. And the im hayapachas mizem ein b'yasei biyah. But it means if he's under 9 years old, the physical act is not termed as biyah. So it's like before, she's a woman that's zekuka to the brothers. Ubiyas ben Teisha eino koina kinyan gomer. But it's not, even if he's 9 years old, it doesn't create a full-fledged kinyan. You know what we view it like? So a heads up for the next chapter. Midrabanan, you don't just have a relation with your husband's widow. The Chachamim says you have to do maimah. You have to do an act of kedushin. This is going to be rabbinic. This is viewed like a maimah. Lefikach ein yivimtoi neteres lezor. Ad sheyavoy olah achar sheyagdil. In other words, and give a get. In other words, you cannot give a get. If she wants to marry someone else, we learned in the intro, one of the commandments connected to this series is that she cannot marry someone else until she gets Yibum or Chalitza.
After a regular man does Yibum, he can't do Chalitza.
After the man goes Yibum, he can give her a get. He can give her a get. He can give her a get, and then she's released.
But just
he cannot do that.
He can do Chalitza.
No, he did Yibum already. No, he cannot do. He can either he cannot do Chalitza B'chlal until he's 13. He cannot. He does Yibum, and don't think because Yibum they're a bona fide couple. For them to be really married, it means it's a marriage which, if he gives her a get, then she can marry anyone else. That only begins after he's 13, or after he is 13. Now, after 13, Chalitza won't be enough. After 13, he has to give. He has to give her a get and give her chalitza. He has to give her a get and chalitza.
You think it's equivalent to a minor?
Huh?
Just a cotton.
Just a cotton. So he's he had a relation with her. No, he had a relation at the time.
If you're over 9, the relation is relation.
And after he was an adult, he did not have any relation. Then she needs a get to remove the mimer, and then she needs chalitza, and then she's allowed to marry. Very good. Very halacha yud zayin. What happens if she's a minor, meaning she's under 12, right? Or she doesn't have the samanim v'chulei. Then the yabim. And there's a chiddush here. What's the chiddush? That we don't say that she might be barren, because if a woman is barren, then there's no dinim of yibum and chalitz, because most women are not barren. Avol einoy chaletzes, but just like him, he cannot do chalitza. There's no chalitza for minors. Achet tagdil evitibade, to know that she's halachically a naira. Vafilu nivala achashtei masrishana einoy chaletzes achet tibade k'vimotze b'asimonim. Very good. And again, Dovi, it means get. In other words, they want to get separated. So there was an act of bia. So if there was an act of bia, what is needed now? A get. So Mustama, we are referring to that the guy was under an adult. Okay. Halacha Yudches. You have a better solution? Let me know. Kshem she'ein hayavim choylitz ad sheyeh yaseh ish. Kach hayavama loisach loitz ad shetiyaseh ish gedoyla. V'yavim katan sheval hayavam ketana. Then yigdalu zemzeh. Halacha Yudches. Hayavama loitis yabim loitach loitz. As we learned, ad shetamtem tishum yoyim. So we learned the din of havchana. B'chlal, when a woman is married to one man, prior to getting married to another man, under any scenario, whether she got divorced, whether she became a widow, she has to wait the 90 days. And that's excluding the day of the death. And that's excluding the day of the Kiddushin. Like any other woman. So just be mindful of that regardless. You have to have the din, as we mentioned, just in case she gets pregnant and she gives birth. We don't say if she gave birth 7 months after the new marriage, maybe it's from the new husband and the baby fully developed in 7 months. Maybe it's a baby from the first husband and we won't know who the father is. And it's that important for us always to know who the father is. Halacha, by middle of 19. Question is, I get it by Yibum. Yibum you can't do. What about Chaliza? Why can't you have Chaliza within the 90 days of the passing of her husband? And they have to go together. Which means whenever you can make a proper yibum, then now if he did do yibum or he did do chalitza within these 3 months, if it turns out that she was not pregnant, which means that she was chayiv, she was a real yivama, then it post facto it's effective. Halacha 20. The nim says meuberes violada. You did chalitza. You didn't even know. By the way, you should have waited. If you would have waited the 90 days, a woman would have known that she's pregnant. But they didn't wait. And it's effective. So a man passes away. The brother right away did chalitza. She's pregnant from the original husband, and she gave birth. Now, guys, what's the problem? Let's work out every single scenario. If she gave birth, what does that mean? That she never felt the evil, right? As we learned before, she gave birth and the baby lived for 30 days, or we know it was a full term. It's as if she didn't receive chalitza, l'may nafkamina, play l'may nafkamina. A kohen can marry her. A kohen can marry her. She was a widow. Once she undergoes chalitza, midrabanan, a kohen cannot marry her. She did chalitza, but it was nothing. Also, this guy who did chalitza will be allowed to marry her relatives. That midrabanan, they're like shnios. Not anymore, because there was nothing between them. If she, God forbid, lost the baby, or shloishim yoim after the baby was born, and therefore midrabanan, we put a question mark whether the baby was a baby. Now, 1 second. Now, what over here? Which means that what? Now, she's a woman that needs Yibum or Chalitza. Now, in the last case, Yibum maybe not, because maybe the baby was a full term. Now you have to do Chalitza. The Chalitza that was done while she was pregnant had no significance. So Chayzer v'Chaylitzla, either him or any other brother. Shechalitzas hamiuberes eina chalitzasa. Bias hameoberes enon klum, gewaldig. And now you have to do it again. Now the Rambam is not saying now you have an option to do Yibum in the last case again, because maybe the baby was full term, but you have to do Chaliza again. Halacha Chaf Aleph.
So we say that there's no Zika, but the Zika is kind of waiting to see what happens with the baby, and then only if the baby doesn't make it, then
we don't know whether there's a Zika or not. It means if a man passes away and the wife is pregnant, and that's the only child, we have a question mark. We don't know. We'll find out later.
No, but then the Chalitza that he did should have worked.
No, it doesn't work.
Because there was no Zika yet.
Because there's no Zika yet. Okay, that's very good. I like that. Because there was no Zika yet. That's the words. That Chalitzas Milberes is not called Chalitza. Halacha Chafalov. Wow, you have to move. Lefikach. Hakoines. Now they made a second union. The co-wife cannot marry another person. Why not? Because we said chalitza or bia of a woman is nothing if she's pregnant. So how is the co-wife mutar l'shuk? She's not. She'ein havlad mater at she'etz laver oilam. And prior to that, like we said, ein chalitza saklum. Allah 22. Hakoyin says Yibum toy, and then him says milberes. You discover that she's milberes. You didn't know that. Now, guys, again, you should have waited 90 days. You didn't wait 90 days. You right away you married your deceased husband's wife. So Bezin will be mafresh them. It makes a lot of sense. Umaptino, you wait. Imepila, if God forbid she loses the child. So then Shuki Yachzer V'Yakayim can be together. But like you said, now the second act of Bia, now that's making the Yibum. Bias Milberes didn't do anything. Halachically. V'im Yolda, Afilu Meis B'Yom Shenoiled, Harei Zemoitzia Beget V'Choylitz Law. You need both. Why do you need both? You need a get because of the Bia, because the baby died. You need to have a Chalitza, right? Because midrabanan, unless you know kololei chadashav, you don't know how to determine the baby, and then only then will she be mutaras lached. Now ve'im this kind of shleishim yom achar shenoilad, but if the baby survives, which is the way of the world, hopefully harei zev lachol kayama. So then we say the bia that you had was tam nothing, because it turns out that you violated an erba. You had a relation with Eisha Sachit. You don't have to undo any of that. Halacha 23, final halacha. Yolda la'achar shisha chadoshim. Mishin esyam novelachol kayama. In the worst case scenario, the guy didn't do what Chacham. He didn't wait 30 days. He didn't wait 90 days. I'm sorry. He married her right away. Guys, Reuven passes away. Shimon marries her. She's pregnant. 6 months and a bit later, she gives birth. Like we said, you don't even know who the father is. How great is that? And he lives. Now you have a suffix. He might be a baby from Reuven, and it was a 9-month pregnancy. Or even if he looks fully developed, the Torah determines that there are times that a baby gets fully developed in 6 months and a bit. They can't be together. Lefikach yoytze beget. Why yoytze beget? Because Shema ben Tisha l'Rishon. Then the kid is a mamzer. So we have a suffix. Yes. He cannot be with her, Danny, because if the baby was conceived by his brother, then she is a chayis ishtoi. Why no? Yes.
They need to get him because he was really married there.
No. Get is because maybe I'm saying they have to be separated. They have to be separated because she's a suffix animal. You're right. You need a get because maybe it's his baby, and therefore his Yibum was a Yibum. Yeah. That's right. Vlad is kosher. Wow. Because we're not gonna paskin mamzer, because we're gonna say that the blood is from him. But
either way,
Vlad is kosher either way. I'm sorry, Vlad is kosher either way, because even if he's not, I take it back. Danny's right. If the guy had a relation with her, what's the worst case scenario? That she was already pregnant with the first husband. Right. So the bia was an act of isur, but the baby is not a mamzer. Right. It's like the baby is not a mamzer. If he has another relation with her, that's something. Then the children that come afterwards are Safek Mamzerim. Exactly. Chavra Pedek Beis has 21 halachas, at least 21. Let's see how quick we can learn it. This is the chapter after we learned the basics. The Rambam is going to speak about the
Because the
dinner.
Rambam's saying that if he goes and has a relation with
That woman,
his brother's wife,
yeah.
those children
Afterwards,
those children would be Matzeva.
Correct. But the first bia, for sure, did not create a mamzer. He had one bia, the baby was born 6 months later. So it's either his, mutter, or the brother's, the baby is not a mamzer. Thank you. Pedig Beis is going to speak about the rabbinic pre-step to Yibum, which is to do to her like you do with any other woman. You have to do Kiddushin. We're going to have many cases, as we had in Milchas Geirushin, of he said and she said, as we'll see in a moment, scenarios where the woman, again, there's many brothers. She wants to have Yibum with one brother, not with another brother. How much credibility do we give to that? Now, when you're dealing with normal families, they're going to respect her wishes. What happens if you're dealing with a dysfunctional families, like most families? So there's going to be a time where if the Torah determines that it has to happen with the older brother, ideally, if she tells the older brother, I don't want you, the other brother can say, since the mitzvah is first on me, I want to do Yibum. If you don't want to marry me, you're like a Meredith. You are refusing marriage. The big nafkamina will be whether she loses a ksuba, whether her refusal will be considered bedin Meredith or not. And we're going to learn in this chapter the isur that she has to be with other men, to marry other men prior to getting Yibum or Chaliza. That's the topic of the chapter. Again, 21 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph, says that that this brother, as we'll explain more details, should not have bia or yibum with the yevimtoi prior to him doing an act of what we call kiddushin in front of two edim. And by the way, kiddushin to a wife is keshev, shtar, and bia. Maimar is give her money to do an act of what we do nowadays, which is either give her money or shove a prut in front of two witnesses. That's called maimar. The word maimar means a statement. But don't think that doing kiddushin finalizes their union. Another thing, if she was not in consent, he did nothing, because we apply the rules of kiddushin for this rabbinic mimer, which is as a woman. No, there's no effectiveness of kiddushin if it's not with her consent. Let's go further. Therefore, a minor uketana minho erusin, not the suyin. You need to have consent to know those dinim. We learned that in the previous segment or in Hilchas. So if she's married from the father and then she becomes a widow, she goes back to her own reshus. But since she was not married yet, that's why whose consent is only needed? Only the father. So the consent here will be the father's consent. Very good. Halacha beis. Just like midrabanan, you do an act of kedushin. There's another rabbinic that you make the Sheva Brachas when you do Yibum and you write a ksuba, kedin kol noise isha. We're going to learn more about the ksuba in a moment. And we already mentioned that sometimes you don't have to write a ksuba because the ksuba of the brother is just extended. But you have to make sure that there is a ksuba. If he did not follow this rabbinic maimar, but kana kinyan damar. Nevertheless, you give him rabbinic floggings and you demand for him to write a ksuba. You do kiddushin and you do the sheva brachas, which is under the chuppah. You write a ksuba. They didn't want for this marriage to be different than any other marriage. Halacha 3. Now, this act of cohabitation is valid, will affect the union. Bein b'shoigeg, whether he did it b'shoigeg. B'shoigeg means that he thought she's another woman, or b'mezid. B'mezid means he didn't do it l'shem yibum. He knew who she is, but he wanted to have an act of zunus with her. Still going to make yibum. Bein ba'oines, if it was, God forbid, against, she was forced. Bein b'rotzain, whether he's mezid, whether this goes on him, whether she shegegos or yanusa. Bein shahoisa he mezido v'hu shegeganus. Bein shahoisa yeshena, which is called an act of coercion if she's sleeping, whether she was awake. Bein shabolar kedarka, bein shaloi kedarka, whether it's just at the beginning of bia, whether it's gemar bia, all of that affects yibum. The one thing needs to be here. There needed to be intent for the act of cohabitation. But this is the coming of the case. In Nafal, when a man falls off the roof and boom, he fell and he fell into her. Or if he had a relation when he was drunk like Lloyd, he had no idea what he's doing. Or if he was sleeping, that's garnished. Read the English. Why? Because that's not called intent for bia. However, if read the English, yes, kana. Because that's already considered l'shem be'ilah. Because we're living in LA. Yeah, all of this makes a lot of sense. Halacha hey. Yevama, shenis yabma, and va'amna v'teich shleishim yoim. We had this in the beginning of laws of marriage. So they move in together. As far as we know, they did Yibum. But how do you know? She is saying loy nevalti. He never consummated the marriage. Va'afal pishu oimer ba'alti, even though he's saying that I consummated the marriage. Now, I want to add something. He's saying I consummated the marriage and I gave her a divorce. They force him to do chalitza. I'm saying he gave her a divorce because of the choyel v'kodam the Geirushin beget. Now, guys, if he would have had a relation with her, then how would you sever the marriage? Only through a get, right? If he's an adult and she's everything fine, but she's claiming you never consummated the marriage, which means that according to what she's saying, a get won't do anything. You don't force him to write another get because mimanavshach. He's saying, I had a relation and I gave her a get. She's saying nothing happened. So then you force him to give chalitza. But if he did not say that he gave her a get, then we tell him or yachloitz and v'yoitzi beget. Now, if he gave her a get after the living together 30 days, and she again is claiming he never had a relation with me, and that's the chiddush that Allah says that when a couple is living together for 30 days, Mustama, at that point they had a relation together. So therefore, you could not force him, but you ask of him. Now, if he is saying, I did not consummate the marriage, then you force him to give chalitza. If she's claiming he consummated the marriage, she's saying that. So now we're married. He is claiming loy ba'alti. So then she doesn't need chalitza. We don't believe him to say, Chevra, that I didn't have a relation with her to bind her. She is claiming there was a relation. She got a get. Get is effective once they had a relation. His words are not powerful enough to make her asur. In other words, you need a get. But she's happy with the get because she's saying, he had a relation with me and he gave me a get. He's saying, no. Even if I gave you a get, it's not effective. I never had a relation with you. He doesn't have that power. Halacha vav. Misha Meis.
End of the day, she would be messing herself up.
That's right. So we trust her. Yeah. Halacha vav. Misha Meis. So now we're starting this whole topic. A man, again, let's go to the Reuven. Reuven married a woman, and God forbid, Reuven passes away, had no children. So now she falls, Yibum Chaliza, to whom there are many brothers. Now Shimon is not the Bechor, but he's now the oldest brother. We're speaking only paternal brothers, right? Reuven has 11 brothers. So the ideal mitzvah ala gadol yavim, the eldest one should be the one, again, that Rambam paskint in last Pedic, kechachamim, and not like Abba Shol, that the first is Yibum. Chalitza is only if there's no Yibum. So what is the first thing that we try to do? The first one should do Yibum, and if he won't do Yibum, the mitzvah of if Chalitza will happen also falls first on the eldest brother. As it says, V'hoya habachar ashetelet. I know the Rebbe always quoted, Ein mikra yotzim midei pshuta. Chazal say that, but Chazal add chutz. Like many people are familiar, Kol Yisrael yesh lem chelik lo'elam haba. Then the Mishnah says chutz. Just over there, there's many chutznikim. There's one mikra that's yotzim midei pshuta. It doesn't mean what it says. This pasuk, that's it. when the Torah says that they should do Yibum, and the words are that their first child should be called on the name of the deceased. God did not mean what this sounds like. When the words doesn't mean that if she does Yibum, then the eldest child should be named after the brother. That also. This verse means that the Bechar doesn't mean the Bechar. It means from the surviving brothers, who is the eldest one? Normally, he's never called a Bechar. A Bechar is a Bechar to the father, a Bechar to the mother. He's not this and not that. In this context, the oldest of the surviving brothers, he should be Yakum al Shem Achiv Hameis. He should be taking the place. He, not the child. The brother should be taking the place of the deceased brother. When it says Ashetei Leid, who she bears, not who the Yevama will bear. Who the mom, Mashma Sheyolda Ha'aim, the Ein Mashma Shetel Yevama. Even though it's paternal brothers. That's the Mikra Yoitze Midei Pshutei. Allah Chesed. So first of all, you come to the eldest. Now, then, 1 second, before Chaliza, like we said, the Rambam holds mitzvah Yibum. Now you go to the other brothers. If none of the other brothers want to do Yibum, so now what kicks in? Chaliza. Nachamal, who has the first mitzvah of Chaliza, the eldest brother. And we tell them all, Lecha mitzvah. And you even bring up again, Oyabim. You can't force the brothers to do Yibum, but you force the brothers to do Chalitza. She may not be left in the state of limbo. Now, what happens if the older brother says, so we just learned that a minor cannot do Yibum. The older brother doesn't want to marry her. There is another brother that's still a minor. The other brother says, I don't want to do Yibum. I'm not going to do Chalitza. Don't force me to do Chalitza. Let me first wait to see if my younger brother, when he becomes Bar Mitzvah, whether he wants to do Yibum. Or there's a brother that's traveling. Let us wait before Chalitza. Let's wait to see if the guy that traveled will return. Or Asher Yavri HaChedesh. The Nimlach boy, the Nimlach boy, and when he comes back, we'll ask him. Let's wait. And if then, and if he won't want, then I will either do Yibum or Chalitza. The older brother has no such right. She may not be left in a state of limbo. In other words, the brothers that are here are going to be given the opportunity because they are here. What happens if the mitzvah, the oldest brother is in a different country? Since Alachi Hagadol Hiya mitzvah, wait. No. Who's here right now? They tell him, you are here. Let's go on her. That means she's already 12 years old and she doesn't want to marry this Yibum. So she has a din of any moiredes al baila. So you can't force a woman. So you force the Yavam to do Chalitza. Now, since she refused the marriage, she loses her ksub. Now let's go, then it gets fun now. Reuven had many wives. We said the older brother. Now the older brother, the older brother is going to say, let's say, Rachel Leah, I want to marry Rachel. Rachel says no. Leah says, I want to marry you. Rachel, if he chose Rachel and she says no, she's called a Moiredes. And he does Chalitza to her and she doesn't get her ksuba. But the other co-wives, they will get their ksuba. We learned this before, like any other widow. That means the estate that Reuven left, right, even prior to however Yerusha will work, that's the one of the Tamai ksuba. The Almana gets to live off it. Mamish, with Mezoinais and with Ksus and with Madoid. What happens if there are many brothers? And the eldest brother asked for one of the wives to do Yibum, and she doesn't want. But she says, I don't want you, but I want another brother. She also is considered a Meiredes. Ain't Shem really God. But what happens if the eldest brother says, I don't want to do Chalitza nor Yibum? And there are other brothers here. We just learned. Then Beis Din will go to one of the other brothers. So now Shimon said no. But you have Levi, you have Yehuda, you have Yisachar. Now, let's say any other of the non-eldest brother is asking to Yibum, and now she says, not with you, but with another brother, and that other brother wants, she's not called a Meiredes. If the Gadol is the one asking her in marriage, she cannot refuse it. The moment it's not the Gadol, therefore all of the other brothers are equal. And since she's not saying no, she's saying no to you, but yes to someone else. And they both want each other. She's not called a Meiredes. If one who was in another country, and she's the one that's saying, I'll wait for him. I'll wait until he comes and I'll do Yibum. But this guy that's here, I don't want to do Yibum. She's also not called a Meiredes. They tell the older one, listen, you can do Chaliza. But if not, she is the one that wants to wait until your brother comes. You're not the oldest one. How great is that? So she says, I want to marry that guy that's traveling. And he comes back. Now you go back again. Now you go back to the one who did want to marry her. Yibum. And we tell her, the only one that wants to marry you is Yisachar. Because we don't pass him like Abba Shol. So therefore, now we go back and we tell this woman, now you got it. That if the din is shetachlit relates to Yabam, as we learned, let's say in last chapter, then she gets the ksuba. If there is a ksuba kshar kol almanis. If he was a mukashchin, which means she, right, can get out of a marriage and getting her ksuba from a mukashchin. Or if he had any other blemish, like we learned in the end of, I think, where was it, an issues, or that if the guy has bad breath, and she says, I don't want to marry him, and she gets chalitza, and she gets her ksuba. However, what happens if she gets certain blemishes while she's already a shemeres yabam, that then the stop chasadeyu, and if he doesn't want to do yibum, he has to give her the ksuba. The wife of Reuben made a neder not to get out of Yibum. It was not related to Yibum. She made a neder which will not allow her to have anything to do with his brothers. So it wasn't to go against the din Torah. She did it when the brother was alive, when her husband was alive. She did it as a generic neder. And now Reuven dies. She's not a Meiredes. She didn't make a neder going against the din Torah. So since she cannot get married, and she gets her ksuba. But if she makes such a vow after Misa's bylaw, then we can ask the husband to do chalitza. But if he says, I want to do Yibum, I can only not do Yibum because she made a vow. That's called a Meiredes, and she loses her ksuba. If we know that is chavna benidra, how do you know? I don't know. But if you can know that, then Ella in Kain Marda Batetzi like Halacha Tezah. Yibum Shutava Yavim Lachalitz. Yibum says to I want Chalitz. And he's saying to her, she's saying, don't give me Chalitza. You know what the problem with Chalitza is? If she would be a normal widow, what would be the din? She gets to live off the estate. She's an almana. Her getting Chalitza, right? She'll get the ksuba, but she won't be able to live off the estate. And she's saying, no. I'm not going to collect the ksuba money. I want to use the Tanai ksuba. I want to, live in my husband's estate. Says that I'm ain shoymim la, because this was from the Nashamayim. Either do Yibum or do Chalitza and take your ksuba. But to live off the estate, you can't. For whatever reason, she says, it's not about money. I'm going to support myself. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to call Yomai. If I'm bound to you, another woman won't even want to marry me. Even though they could, but he can claim, no, I want to resolve this relationship. And even if he was married, he can claim, I want to have the option of marrying another wife. And maybe another wife will not marry me if I'm connected to you. Right? So she cannot say, she can't say, I want to do nothing. Why? Because let's say it was a marriage of shniyos. Remember that? So that's no ksuba. Or, and as will be explained more, these cases in chapter 6. Wait until tomorrow. It's going to be freilach with the next day. Then yes, miyabim. But ve'ein lo olav ksuba. She, just like the first marriage, she married a shniya. There was a knas. They can do yibum, but you won't have a ksuba. How? The dina im there has to be yibum or chalitza, and she won't get a ksuba. Now that's only for the ikar ksuba. What about toisefes? You have to remember the dina. That toisefes ksuba is given because the husband obligates himself because of chibas bia. That exists. No, whatever the rules were when the first marriage continues. But if the first husband didn't write a ksuba wrongfully, or if she sold the ksuba, she sold to him the ksuba, even though the din is that at that point there has to be another ksuba, but he didn't do it. Or she forgave the ksuba. Here the yavam has to write a ksuba. A regular marriage. No, if whenever the chachamim demanded of him to have a ksuba for her, even if there wasn't such a ksuba, the new marriage has to have a ksuba. Prior to them consummating the yibum, before he gets chalitza. Now let's go ahead to the final topic of today's chapter. She may not marry another man, as it says in Parshas Kiseitze, loy metan aleph, loy tia eshes hamei sachutza leishzot. And furthermore, if she marries another man and the other man has a relation with her, both of them get malchus. It's not an isur erva, right? But it's an isur alav. And we demand for him to divorce her. The kedushin is chal, like a kohen marries a divorcee. And even if they have many children, and now that she had a relation with another man, v'nesra olav al yivama, just like a married woman who has a relation with another man, asura labal, asura laboyo, same thing over here. 1 second, but now the yivama chaylitzla. Asura to the yavam, but chalitza is needed, and then she can marry someone else, not to that husband. Halacha 19. This kachala acher. If she only did kedushin, huh? No. If she got kedushin before yibum or chalitza, then we don't say that she's asur on that. Loinesra al yavam. Not asur labal, asur labayil. It was only kedushin. Ella noisim lo hazar shekitcha get, because the kedushin is toifus, and the yavama miyabam meichaylitz. If the Yibum is a kohen, she got a get now. So look at what we do. Then he had the second marriage. Teitzei hazar beget. Teitzei hazar beget. If he should not benefit by staying married to her. V'yachlitz lo Yibum.
I shall have to do chalitza from the brother. But because she went ahead and married
another person, very good. If this person who gave her a divorce from the Geirushin, and now she got, like we said, chalitza from the Yibum, and now he married her after that, post facto, ein mitzin the yadai. In halacha yud ches, if she married someone else, we don't allow them to be married. But here she only got kedushin, so we don't say asam asalabat. Clear. And we forced a get, as we said. And then she got chalitza. And then she remarried this guy. Even afterwards, he says, so another thing, Avama is mezana. While she's still in the state of Zakuka, she does not become asur on the Yavama. No, she's not like a married woman that's mezana. Ella, still. Right, so final that's a suffix midivreim im yesh olel zikas yavam ein olav zikas yavam. For example, Yavama sheyolda velad shalekol lechadash shleishim yaim, as we learned in the first chapter. So the Reuven passes away. She's pregnant. She gave birth. And God forbid the baby died within 30 days. So rabbinically, we don't know whether it was a viable baby. And the din is, as we learned, such a woman that went and got kiddushin from another before chalitza. Here we demand of the yavam to give her chalitza, and she can stay with her husband. If the brother will give her chalitza, he's going to ruin that marriage. Then wow, ain't no chalitza. Because you cannot answer this guy and his wife misafek Divreim. Now, 1 second. Geirushin hakoyin. If a priest divorces a woman or dies, harezu choyletzes. Very good. Chavra, God willing, a lot more to be continued tomorrow.